Now, I'm really happy to welcome back Mr. Adam Chernoff from the Simple Handicap and Right Angle Sports. You can follow him on Twitter at Adam Chernoff. Adam, thanks for coming back to the show. How are things north of the border?
It's honestly the warmest winter that I ever remember. We had the coldest December in history, and the last 3 weeks have been there's got to be something bad coming because it's too good to be carrying on like this. So it's all good all the way around.
That's weird because I'm in Arizona, as you know, and it's been cold. And as a matter of fact, I looked at the forecast the next 2 weeks, and it's not even going to hit 65 degrees. And I know it's January, but normally it's like 60s and 70s. So we're hitting our cold spell here. I'm wondering why that is, and maybe the weather's just getting out of its system for the Super Bowl coming in February here.
It got to be something. We're high 30s. So that gap between Arizona and Western Alberta, Canada should not be 20 odd degrees. It should be a lot greater than that. So I don't know. There's something brewing out there somewhere. It's coming. But hey, the last 3.5 weeks here have just been glorious.
Well, that's wonderful, man. Less shoveling snow is always a key thing that I remember from my days in the Midwest for all those years. But down here, I'm just kind of waiting around for the Super Bowl. We had the college football playoffs. I'm kind of wondering if you're going to make an appearance down here for the Super Bowl. Anything in the travel plans?
Oddly, not a lot. I was debating about a weekend down at Circa for NFL playoffs, but I don't think it's going to happen. But you never know. We got 2 more weekends left, so maybe the Super Bowl. It's so much in Vegas. It's not, to me. It's a lot. You're not getting nearly the freedom and space that you would typically get in like a regular season weekend, which are busy enough as is. But it's a lot going on. So it's a lot of fun. But I don't mind the old couch setup at home.
No, I don't mind. As you get older, the couch looks nicer.
Oh,
that's for sure.
Phenomenal. There's no.
I mean, you got your buddies over. You have strip cards. You got the good food. You don't have to drive. Yeah, that's not bad either. It's not bad. No. If you like events and like girls, check out the Super Bowl at a sports book. You might have some fun. So there you go. But anyways, we have a massive, massive playoff weekend here to talk about. But first, I want to talk about your shift, man. I mean, you're at Covers, and then I didn't really get to interview since that happened. I think I had you on like 2 weeks before it happened. I'm just curious about your shift to Right Angle Sports, and what are the new challenges that you face over there?
So the shift was just really interesting timing. Everything kind of came together at the right moment to make it work. It was something that predated the move to Covers by a year or two of the potential of it happening, and they've always been a group that I've had in high respect, as has many other people within the industry for the better part of 2 decades. And so the idea of getting to go work with them, as they're a professional betting group, there's anywhere from 12 to 16 people working full-time behind the scenes. And when it comes to sort of respect and legacy as a bettor within the industry, Ed Golden, he's as high as it gets. And so to get to go work with him and see how they operate and get to learn from things that they do was a really good chance for me. And so took that in the latter part of October, and then it's just been kind of playing catch up the last almost been there 3 months full time now. So it's been playing catch up and figuring out how everything goes, but it has been great, and it's a really good home at the moment.
No, that is fantastic. It's great to get experience everywhere, because I think you've been on both sides of the book, and just all the education that you get from different places just kind of builds upon you as just growing as a human and as something that you love to do in the industry. So that's wonderful, and your videos are fantastic, and I'm glad they're taking good Gary over there, because I've heard about the outfit, and I heard it's definitely a great place to be. You guys get probably bugged a lot about some of the lines that you have before you even figure it out, don't you?
In terms of what is given out and how that process goes, or what do you mean?
Well, I suppose as a customer, you're like, this line just hit. Probably want the information before the line moves. That's what I would.
It's a balance for sure that I think that they've done well in sort of navigating, because the truth is, anytime that they come up with a bet, whether they're betting it, whether they're giving it out, it's going to move every sports book, and the odds completely shifts the market.
For sure.
And so I think there's a lot of people who, because of me or just how social media is available to so many people nowadays, are becoming aware of what the guys do over there for the first time. And so they see it. And because it's so different, it's sort of unexpected, especially when it gets to the paid side of things where the service is so popular and so big. And so for someone who's not used to that, coming over, getting a bet and thinking, okay, I'll bet this later, I'll bet it closer to game time, and then you go just seconds later and it's 2-3 points different, that could be a shock to the system and a surprise. So there's definitely some feedback from that, but it's part of what they do for sure.
Oh, that's for sure. And it's fine because I follow it, obviously. And knowing you guys are on there and moving lines, it's just a little process that you have to do because sometimes it gets overmoved. I've seen some of these smaller FCS lines that just went completely way past the number that you guys gave out. And it's interesting how you got to do some fakes and stuff. It's just a new thing that kind of came this year in the market, that how much something could actually move and when it might even be profitable past the EV mark to buy back. I always think about that, Adam.
It's definitely a thought that probably not a lot of people had months, years ago. But now, because it's something that people like the team at Red Angle Sports have the ability to do in shows or give out, becoming something that people are more aware of for sure. So I do think there's a lot of the betting world that obviously hasn't seen it yet because it's so big, but it's a fun sort of challenge to navigate. That's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. The sports betting industry keeps changing and throwing new things at us, but we love it. Keeps us on our toes, my man. Let's get into some playoffs, my friend. Divisional playoffs. And I don't think we need to recap that Monday night game. That was pretty disgusting to see what happened to poor old Tom Brady. And there was just, they were lost from the get-go, weren't they?
Worst playoff game for sure I think we've ever seen from him. Arguably one of the worst we've ever seen him ever, like in terms of the game plan that they came out with. Some of the throws he were making were just bizarre. But I mean, you look at things in the rear view now, 65 plus passes for the game, 8 run attempts against the Cowboys defense that's so soft in the middle, in a game that wasn't out of reach early on when they still had no interest in running the football. That was quite the way to go out, which I would have to think was his last game in Tampa.
I would have to think so too. But, we'll see where there's some interesting places that are, people are just speculating. I've heard a little Miami speculation. I heard even San Francisco, believe it or not, speculation. I think that story is still a work in progress with how good Purdy's doing, but we'll get to that game. Let's start with Jacksonville, Kansas City here. And this is the Betfred odds screen. You can check out Betfred at betfredsports.com. And Jacksonville is a 8.5 point dog. And the total of this game is up to 52.5. I think it was at 53. It looks like it got pushed down a little bit. So, interesting game. I think it's interesting because, well, A, these teams have played each other. And, B, there's a lot of hype on what Trevor Lawrence did. And the big narrative this week, Adam, is teams that had the big comeback lose or don't cover the following week. I don't have the stat on that. I don't have the ATS trend. Everyone's talking about this week. I think I had to bring it up. But does this narrative hold any water referring to this game in your mind?
I don't know what the number is either, but it makes sense in terms of, first of all, a team potentially not playing very well if they need to have a massive comeback, but then also that's likely what sticks in the mind and sort of the perception of what the finishing outcome of that game is, which is not overly reflective perhaps of how the game should have played out. So like if the Jags were down 4 touchdowns, it wasn't a good game by them to begin with. They come back and now everybody is speaking well against Jacksonville, whereas a lot of other times that game plays out where it's the complete opposite. We were saying how bad of a game the Jags put forth. And so it makes sense that you would see that as something within the market that doesn't necessarily carry over to the next week in terms of success. So again, I don't know that number, but that would make sense for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost a mental thing. You're exhausted from that comeback mentally. So I think there's a lot of mental and physical that go into things, but it's not just when we say tired, it's not just physically tired. You're mentally tired from what you have to do. And that's why people talk about travel. And we'll get into the travel spot when we talk about the Cowboys this week. But this spread, I understand this spread. At first I like Jacksonville, and I admit that I did take Jacksonville at the 9. I expected this thing to go down a little bit farther. It's sticking at 8.5, and I think that's proper in my opinion. These teams played back in Arrowhead in November. Now, Mahomes sliced them up, man. I mean, they only won by 10 points, but his stats were amazing that game. I watched it. They didn't have any answer from Mahomes rolling to the right. He's got that pocket presence to know exactly when to shoot out to the right and just extend that time for his receivers and for Travis Kelce. He knows exactly where Travis Kelce is going to be. And I always said, double up Travis Kelce and pray to God, because that's pretty much your only shot at beating the Chiefs. I don't know if they're going to change from that. I guess my philosophy when I took the 9, Adam, was that I don't believe in narratives like, you play them 3 times as a charm or anything like that. But what I do believe is there is familiarity, and both these teams were trying to win that game. So I think that would lean a little bit towards the Jaguars. And if the Chiefs do have a weakness, they do allow 4.4 yards per rushing attempt. The Jaguars do average 4.8. I think Trevor Lawrence needs to use his legs a little bit if he wants to be in this game. But the problem is if Kansas City does jump the Jaguars, they're not going to screw up like the Chargers did. They're going to keep piling on the points, And so I actually found I teased my way out of it, and I got past the 3, and so I do have a middle setup for me, and we'll get into the other end of that later. But I do know another weakness for the Chiefs, and if this is going to be a shootout like this total says, going past the 51 at 52.5 here, it's their red zone. They give up 6 points at a 67% clip, in the red zone. They're second worst red zone team on defense. Otherwise, their defense, as long as they keep the teams on their heels, they're doing fine because they expect a pass, and that's how they can put away from teams. But man, yeah, this Kansas City team, they've had some weird hiccups. I like the break. My number was actually 6.75, and that's why I took it. But metrically, I'm not in love with it anymore. What do you think about this game?
So I'll be on the other side here. KC at 8.5 to me, I thought was a little bit short of where it should be. Not the best matchup for the Jags defense in this one. They struggled particularly against 2 things, and that's tight end production as well as running back production, both on the ground and through the air as well. And so you think about kind of the staples of the Chiefs offense. It's a lot of Travis Kelce. It's a lot of Jerick McKinnon out of the backfield. That kind of stabilizes things. And so I think that's going to be a problem for the Jags to manage with the entire game. And the other thing that I would say, just from a where we're at perspective, if you look at the last 8 weeks of the season for the Jags, sort of that run that they had to get into the playoffs and win the AFC South, to finish things up, they had 3 weeks in a row, backup or third string quarterbacks. So they had Zach Wilson and Chris Streveler. They had Josh Dobbs, and then they had a Davis Mills Driscoll combination when they played Houston. And that sort of in that 3-week stretch, late December into January, is really when we saw kind of the Jags from a ratings and price perspective, they get sort of ratcheted up. And I question how much that should have been warranted because of who they played. Because if you look at some of the other games within the schedule, we just saw the Chargers put 30 points up on them in a second half where LA didn't show up. And anytime they had to step up in class against a better offense, it was 40 points allowed to the Lions. It was 34 points allowed to the Cowboys. Like you mentioned, the Chiefs did some work on them as well, 480 plus yards in that first meeting. And so we really just have this very split Jags team where it's success against really bad quarterbacks and then a bit of a struggle against really good quarterbacks. And we obviously have a very good one here for the Chiefs. And so I think off of that game last week, coming in here against a good offense, it might be tough for the Jags.
Yeah. I kind of came to that philosophy after I broke it down and saw some of the weaknesses with the Jags. Their defense just isn't good. And that's the reason I took the over in their game against the Chargers. And I was a little worried, was 27-0. I'm like, could this just be the running back Eckler all second half? But then obviously Brandon Staley shows up, and
a little bit more than that.
You don't have to worry about that anymore. But that's what happens, and that's a lot of big tells when there's a big blowout happening. It's the under you want to look at because the team's going to try to get out of it in many cases. So no problem. I'm still sticking with my 9, but it's not at 9. I tease my way out of it. Let's move on to the Giants versus the Eagles. The Eagles are minus 7.5. Let's check out our Betfred odds screen. I believe the total is around 48.5. I think it's on Betfred. We are at, a flat 48 right here. I've seen some books, Adam, that it was 48.5, but I do have a play on this game. But I'm gonna let you go first and see if there's anything there that let's see if we match.
Well, the big question here is obviously Hurts, right? How healthy is he? Because if he is healthy, I don't know of a situation where we could get to this game being Eagles only 7.5 at home off of the bye. It would be the same price that we saw this game close earlier in the season when the Eagles were in New York. And then we know a couple things. And obviously that game, incredibly one-sided. The Eagles put up nearly 50 points, was non-competitive. So you could look at that game in New York and say 7.5 wasn't the right number. I think that's pretty fair. And then you also have the case of, obviously, we're playing this game in Philly. We're not playing it in New York. So you're going to have a bit more of an increased price because of the home field advantage switch. And you have the bye, which is definitely worth something, especially when you get into this divisional round of the playoffs. And so all that put together, we're seeing the same price. It's really dependent on Hurts and his health. And this would imply that Hurts is less healthy than he is close to 100%. And because of that, we're at a much shorter number. All that aside, I do think that if there's an element of this where the Giants are getting respect because of what they did last week against the Vikings, I start to question how valuable that win might have been, considering how bad of a team the Vikings in reality ultimately were. So I know it was a spot where the Giants were a 2.5-point dog. They go into Minnesota. They look well on offense. They're very efficient with Dable and Kafka, who have been great all year. But like, what is beating the Vikings? If they're a below average team, are you giving the Giants a bump for beating a below average team that they're maybe undeserving of coming into this? And so it really depends. You can say that this number is really short because of the Hurts situation. You can say that it's short because of the Giants being maybe a little bit overinflated because of the win against Minnesota. Where's the right answer within that? Sort of a good discussion point. But to me, much more inclined to look at this number and believe it's short at 7.5 than I could say I'm going to make a case for the Giants just because we're getting the hook above the 7 here. And so to me, it's absolutely Philly or nothing.
My number's 10,
which is I think fair if Hurts is healthy.
Yeah, that's my metric number. I didn't bet it, well, because I don't need to. It's been between it. Why would I rush into that? And 7.5 to 10 is not the biggest EV advantage, really. It's closer than people think, people that know these numbers. There's a couple reasons, really. I mean, the Eagles are kind of limping into the playoffs the way I see it. It's kind of weird with Hurts hurt, and I think they took a beating a little bit. And you have to look at their strength of schedule. It hasn't been that great. They had was it a third place schedule this year? It wasn't a.
It was one of the easiest for sure, but it was one they performed quite well against.
They did. They performed great against it. Over the last 7 weeks, their defense was ranking 11th in EPA, opponent EPA, I should say, EPA per play. So, I mean, that's a little regression. I'm not super worried about that. I love the fact that they have the bye. The Giants defense is horrible. 5.9 yards per play is what they give up, 28th in opponent EPA per play. The Giants, their path to victory, and this is kind of where the Eagles were a little bit susceptible last year, Adam, was against the run because, I think they had some injuries, but they're letting teams run. And I kind of wonder it's because they're just trying to stop the big play, tighten up a little bit more towards the plus territory, the red zone and all that. Maybe that has something to do with it. And I did see the Eagles stop the run. I think they stopped the Titans pretty good. But, the numbers would suggest allowing 4.6 yards per rush, 26 an opponent rush EPA. Is that Saquon Barkley could have a game here. And Daniel Jones is doing exactly what Daboll teaches, running quarterback. You got Josh Allen learning how to run, which I thought Josh Allen should have done more of last week, by the way. But anyways, Daniel Jones is running the ball. Giants are 4.8 yards per rush. So I think they do score some points. So I guess if you know where I'm kind of leading into, it's the over. And I did take the over at 47. Now, obviously, I'm hoping for good weather. It is in Philadelphia in the winter. Yep. And so you're concerned a little bit about that. But the Giants just giving up 5.2 yards per rush themselves. It's funny, I'm bagging on the Eagles rushing defense, but the Giants give up 5.2 yards per rush, 30th in opponent rush EPA. This team, if the clock's not running, if they're, getting big chunks of yards, should be able to score pretty easily. Net yards per play tells me the spread is 10. It's 1.4. The Eagles have a massive net yard per play advantage over them. I calculated that one net yard per play is roughly 6.5 to 7 points of difference. If you're just looking at that one stat, of course, right?
Yep.
1.4, you're getting towards the 10 and then add home field advantage. Metrically, like I said, I have the 10. If it gets down to 7, I'll be playing the Eagles. But right now, I wouldn't mind using them as a teaser. And we probably just blew through the biggest teaser in the book, Kansas City.
And a lot of people have that in the accounts for sure. Yep.
Yeah. Not saying I'm going that route. I'm going to pick my other leg, but I do think that the over. The last game went to 70 points for a reason. I don't trust the when they had their backups. Actually, I think that was kind of an advantage sitting back on their heels with Webb playing. Kind of watching the Eagles needing the win at least through the first 3 quarters. I think that was a little bit more of an advantage for the Giants too. So there is familiarity, but I think the over's toast. I would like this all the way up to 50.5, Adam.
Okay. Strong words.
Strong words, my man. Well, there you go. Let's move on to Cincinnati versus Buffalo. And here's the thing. And this is what we're going to hear all week. And there's going to be a lot of questions, Adam. And I'm sure you're going to cover some of this, but the Bengals offensive line injuries. My question to you about this, are these injuries prominent enough for us sports bettors to call them cluster injuries? Or if not, or if so, how should we rate the line or at least penalize the Bengals from where you kind of have them now based upon their Kappa and was it Williams, their injuries that they currently have?
Yeah, so anytime you lose 3 starting offensive linemen, it's impactful. There's no question about it. It makes a difference. The line is obviously much worse up front. What's I would say is the most prevalent talking point here is when we get into the point spread, which we've obviously seen adjusted quite a bit from 2 weeks ago when this matchup took place in Cincinnati, is are we maybe overblowing it a little bit? Because there's a couple things to think about. The most obvious would be that Joe Burrow got to the Super Bowl less than a year ago with an offensive line that is much worse than what he will be playing behind in this game on Sunday. So it's a guy that we have very recent proof of being able to succeed behind the bad offensive line. The second thing is you think about what happens when you have a bad offensive line. If a team can generate pressure very quickly, that means you're going to have to be throwing it very quickly. That means that you're going to have to adjust your wide receivers' routes to help support that. You're going to need likely a receiving game out of the backfield to help alleviate some of that rush and keep opposing pass rushers honest. When we just look at what the Bengals have been all season, Joe Burrow has the second quickest release time of any quarterback in the NFL. And so he's all season, even behind the really good offensive line, been throwing the football and getting rid of it very, very, very quickly. So this isn't going to be a new change for him where it's this team that goes from like high to low 3-second release times with these deep downfield developing routes. It's him already having a very quick release and a lot of these pass combinations for the Bengals being very short, quick passes as is. And the Bills as a team are kind of willing to concede a lot of those things underneath. Like, that's the style of defense they want to play. And I have a hard time thinking that they're going to replicate what they did last week against the Dolphins, which was blitzing a ton because of Skylar Thompson. If they end up doing that, Burrow's going to have success either way. And so I just feel like the way that we're speaking about these offensive line injuries, yes, they're impactful. Yes, they matter, but it's not doom for the Bengals because of how this offense is set up.
Not gloom and doom. And I agree with you on that. You know, looking at the Betfred odds, you're at a solid 5 here. The total of this is at 48. So, you know, it's funny. At first glance, you look at this total and you're like, Buffalo Bills scoring all those points. The Bengals with a very powerful passing game. How's this total 48? Well, metrically, my number came up to 49. So I'm not that far off it personally from my algorithm.
And this has come down from 51 was the peak that we saw. That was like yesterday morning. There were some 51s available, a lot of 50.5. It's been under money because of the Bengals offense just kind of forced to be restricted because of the injuries, but also what they want to do, how the Bills defend. And then on the other side, it's a Bengals defense, which is extremely good at in-game adjustments and changing, especially once you get later in the game, to what offenses are going to do. But also there's that recent familiarity within this matchup. It wasn't a full game that was played, obviously, but there was certainly a very scripted drive shown for the Bengals to adjust off of. But just how the Bills offense kind of has sputtered out at times recently plays a lot into this too. So you look at the total and it's easy to see why it's come down a little bit.
Yeah, and of course, Buffalo 13-mile-per-hour winds could be higher or lower. It could be raining or snowing by that time. That's Buffalo, you know. It comes in packs.
Yep, for sure.
And so it's almost like a free roll that people grab an under there. But at the same time, I mean, Buffalo's got to be used to it. Cincinnati, it's not like they're a warm weather team either. You know, that's some of the stuff I look at. But I think you keyed in right about what you said. That game, I think this is just ugly, and the fact that Buffalo's hosting it in a way. I almost think that Cincinnati probably feels they were a little bit gracious, and obviously what happened was terrible. And I agree with, you know, the philosophy of all that. I agree with being canceled or postponed. But, you know, at the same time, it screwed them over. You know, they would have been hosting this game. Why is the coin flip not? I mean, if I'm in the Bengals, philosophically, I'm kind of like, man, well, this is going to piss me off a little bit more. I'm going to go, you know, it's almost a different situation for them. I almost think what you saw last week did have to do with their offensive line, but I mean, John Harbaugh is a damn good coach. He did exactly what he was supposed to do to stop it. And it just was that he played smash mouth football. He had those guys leading with their helmets on the line. He had them just punching them in the mouth. You know, and that's what that kind of team does. It punches you in the mouth right at the line of scrimmage. You know, the only other team that does it as hard as them is probably the 49ers. But that's the way to stop the Bengals. But I look at the Bills, and even though they do have a great front seven, I just feel like they're a little bit more finessey, especially on the offensive side of the ball. You know, they're not quite as rough and tough as the Baltimore Ravens. I think the Bengals are fortunate to get out of that, but I think that line is wrong because of it. I was seriously worried about my Bills side in the beginning of that game until that injury, Adam. I thought I saw a better team in the Bengals, in my opinion. And now they do not have that Kappa, most likely. I mean, I think Kappa's listed as questionable.
That's a generous questionable for sure at this point.
And is Williams generous? Jonah Williams, their other tackle, who
dislocated kneecap came right out. Like that's a week to week minimum. It's I would be shocked if any of the three. Well, if any of the two, either way, I just don't see it.
Right. Well, you know, that's just leading back into what you said. They played with a worse offensive line last year. They still have some good backups, and you know, they lost a few pass rushers in AJ Epinesa at the end of November. Jordan Phillips and Daquan Jones is listed as questionable as D tackles, But the biggest thing is Micah Hyde was one of their best safeties that went out at the second game of the year. And obviously you have to remember that the DeMar Hamlin injury is another safety. And I think that is why Skylar Thompson had a little bit of success off them last week. But that's very concerning when you have a Jamar Chase, a T. Higgins, a Hayden Hurst, a Boyd. I mean, that if Burrow can get open in the open field, he can keep this game close. One thing I've noticed about the Bills too, man, Josh Allen just can be real sloppy with that ball. He lets teams back in the game, like the Vikings game. He let the Packers cover the back door that killed me in my contest plays. That's what their mantra has been. I mean, Buffalo's got the stronger offense. They have a 1.0 net yard per play. The Bengals, believe it or not, is only 0.1 net yard per play on the positive, which is a little bit mind-blowing coming into this game. But, both quarterbacks, top 5 in drop back EPA and completion percentage over expectation. I mean, they're just fantastic by the numbers. I don't even need to break that down. I think that's a very well-known thing. But, the Bills, not the best running game, 16th in rush EPA. And I know that Singletary's doing better than he did last year, but it's not like going to be the punch you in your mouth type system. The Bills' weakness is against the pass right now. I think if they get Mixon going in the passing game, like you saw all playoffs last year, that's where it's very dangerous. The Patriots really showed their path to victory, right? I thought that they did a great job with Ramondre Stevenson against this team. If it wasn't for those 2 special teams touchdowns, the Patriots might have won that game. It was crazy to see that. The Bills leaking oil all over the place, with the way they're playing against a terrible Miami team. I mean, if the Bengals are smart, they get Mixon involved. I have them covering this game. I know it's probably a public play, but I'm taking them at 5. So I feel good about that one. But we'll see. We'll see what happens in Buffalo. Did you make any plays in this game? Because I'm also looking at a prop I want to run by you.
I was on the under, but that is since moved, so I wouldn't be jumping into bet under 48.
Okay. Well, my question is sack prop would be possibly in the works here. Because if that offensive line is really that bad, will the books adjust quick enough to make it high enough? Because Joe Burrow in itself gets sacked even with good offensive lines. So a way to hedge and possibly hit both plays, if I can get enough down, is taking a sack prop, obviously on the Bengals or against the Bengals on the Bills.
It'll definitely be adjusted up. The question is, will it be high enough to reflect what could be on the field? But it'll certainly be higher than it usually is.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So definitely want to ask that question. I might be attacking, hedging my somewhat at least +5 here with sack prop. So let's move on to the biggest story, I guess, would be the 49ers with Brock Purdy and the Mr. Insignificant, I think it is, last pick of the draft, right?
Here we go.
There we go, baby. And the Cowboys. I mean, this line is 3.5. The total is 46. Looking at Betfred odds screen here, let me share that. It is still 3.5. Total flat 46. It's kind of interesting, and I wanted to ask you, was there a look ahead if it was going to be versus Dallas or Tampa? And what was the adjustment, if there was, after the Niners beat Seattle?
There wasn't anything that was posted and widely available for that. So that was to be determined. What I have seen around was that the early speculation was this game was going to open 4. And that's where it did open, and Dallas has been bet since. So there wasn't much else that was lingering around.
All right. So fair enough on that. So here's the thing with me. The big narrative too here is the Brock Purdy doubting. I'll admit I was involved in some of his doubting. I think the first Seattle game during the season, I took Seattle. They fumbled the ball away, just like they fumbled the spread away in the second half of that last game. I didn't touch it. I didn't take him last game, but I did. I was trying to, find a good spot to fade the young quarterback, but that narrative has burnt tickets and costed people a lot of money, hasn't it, Adam?
No, it sure has. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, so, is there a point where, of course, it's the point where you're not going to bet them. Maybe they lose. That's just how, people think, right?
That's the law. That's right. Yeah.
That's the law. If you want the Cowboys to win, don't let me bet on them. All right. They played wonderful. And it was one of the best games I've seen Dak play, on Monday. It was, and of course, you're going against a terrible Tampa team that was always a step behind them. But they played to the strengths, and what that was the Cowboys, they didn't have to deal with a lot of deep balls to really stretch their defense out. It was a lot of over the middle that Brady was doing. Then he eventually checked down, but by that time, they're kind of come crashing down on White and Fournette and, the tight ends there. So, it's one of those situations. It was just a terrible game plan by Leftwich. I thought it was awful. But Kyle Shanahan's not that stupid. He's going to get guys in space, 3-step drop, quick stuff. He's going to stretch it out a little bit to Ayuk, and he's going to tire that defense out. But, there's a couple problems that I have with the Niners. If you really look at their schedule, and this is what nobody's really talking about, Adam, their strength of schedule is bad. It's really bad. I mean, they came in with a third or fourth place. It was a fourth place schedule, I think. Or no, was it third? I don't know. It might have been a third place schedule. So, I'm definitely concerned about that. And, I wonder if we should factor in strength schedule here. Dallas has only 0.3 net yards per play. The Niners are a +1. The Niners are a little better than that, because they had their injury woes earlier in the season. Dallas relatively healthy, except for that first left tackle that was out, I guess, in the beginning of the year. Then their defense was a little bit banged up, I guess, towards the end. But both teams passed the ball well. The Niners 7.7 yards per pass. Dallas is at 6.6. The Cowboys, to me, are Jekyll and Hyde. A lot of people are saying this is the fourth week of travel. Well, if it didn't happen the third week of travel, you're really going to factor in the fourth week. For now, they probably used to it, So I don't want to hear that narrative from people. Maybe it affects it somewhat, but I mean, this is the playoffs here. But if Dak can get flustered, there's no better person to fluster him than a Kyle Shanahan defense that throws stunts and, I should say a San Francisco defense, and with Joey Bosa or Nick Bosa actually possibly disrupting Dak, fumbling the ball in those types of situations. But one thing I am concerned is that I did watch when the 49ers stepped up in class. The 49ers have played the worst passing defenses in the league this year, worst passing offenses minus Kansas City and the Raiders. And when they played Kansas City and the Raiders, they got scored on 34 or more points, 34 and 44. Can Dak get it together and get this passing game going? Because I am seriously concerned for their secondary. If they don't get to the quarterback, then you see a game like what happened with Kansas City, and they could be exposed. So my point is, I'm talking myself out of both sides. And my number's 5. That's my pure metric number, but there's nothing I can do at the 3.5 at.
So a lot going on here. Let's start with Purdy. He has led the league in time to throw as well as open receiver percentage. And that, I think, is often wrongly interpreted as like a lucky situation to be in. But it really ties into the Kyle Shanahan scheme, which is so good at getting guys open and so good at taking pressure off of quarterbacks. That's why we're seeing him have so much success. So that's kind of like number one. So when you're saying that, like, not you specifically, but anyone's like, well, when is this going to fall off? And when is he going to come back to reality? And when does this happen? It's a 7th round quarterback that's being treated as such, that's in a perfect offensive system for not only him, but almost any quarterback to succeed, with a ton of playmakers around him. And so those playmakers aren't going away. The scheme isn't going away. The Cowboys are not going to be a defense that sets up well to just derail all of that. And so there's just not enough talent in the secondary to completely shut this down. And the biggest weakness for Dallas is in the middle of the field and their defensive line, where the Niners are extremely efficient at running the football. It's just, this is a bad matchup, not just for Dallas, but for any team. So that's kind of the Purdy thing on the side. What I think is maybe a more interesting angle within this game than that, when we get into saying like who of the Niners played and how has it gone, there's no question the strength of schedule has been light, but the team continues to exceed expectations on the point spread. Since Purdy's come in, you look at the point spread record, the only blemish within all of that was, like you mentioned, that Raiders game, where that was the whole Stidham experience and a massive game for him and McDaniels and how that played out. Otherwise, it's been consistent for what this team's been able to do. Defensively for the 49ers, in that Seahawks game, although Geno wasn't able to fully exploit it, there were guys running wide open that was uncharacteristic for this DeMeco Ryans defense. And that's, I think, kind of interesting when you start to look at the Cowboys with the addition of T.Y. Hilton, 3 wide receivers that can get open in space, and it's not just the CeeDee Lamb show. That's kind of an interesting thing to look at within this matchup, especially if the Cowboys are playing from behind and need to kind of increase a little bit of urgency within this. And so where I kind of get to putting all that together, this total at 46 to me is short, below 47. I see this number needing to be higher, considering how much offensive success the Niners have, no matter what happens, how they match up against this Cowboys defense, as well as what the Cowboys could potentially do on offense against this Niners defense, which, again, there were guys wide open for the Seahawks that, if that's the same case this week, the Cowboys are going to score too.
Yeah. I mean, 46 right now, flat. I believe the weather is supposed to be good there. Last week, it was supposed to be bad. Then the sun came out. And
no weather concerns for this one.
Yeah, no weather concerns. Yeah, I can see it being a little bit low. Yeah, that's a good. I'm going to look at my number right now on this total. Mine's 47. So, yeah, it's a little bit low according to my metrics here. So 47.1. I can definitely see this. And that's, there's a lot of desperation when it comes to playoffs too. It's
always, yep.
Yeah. So you're going to get a lot of crazy plays that can go both ways. Any pick sixes, special teams desperations can happen. It's funny, this Brett Maher is getting a lot of crap this week for those missed extra points. And I explained earlier that I'd be danged if he missed one this week, because he's probably only practicing extra points going into his field. So
that was a rough outing, no question.
It was a rough outing. Well, so great stuff, Adam. I mean, to recap, I took the Jaguars at 9, but you like Kansas City 8.5. So we have some disagreement on that one. I like the over 47 to 48. I took 47. It's at 48 right now in the Giants Eagles game. Did you have a play on that? I don't think
it would be Eagles or pass.
Eagles or pass. Yeah, because my number's 10 on the Eagles. Bengals, I like them at +5. And did you play the Bills?
I had the under, but I would not play it right now at 48.
You would not play it at 48. And then on this, you're taking the over on the 46. Okay.
That of everything that's still out on the board, the over at 46 for Dallas, San Francisco would be my look. Yep.
Okay, fair enough. So the obvious teaser is definitely 8.5 down to the 7.5. I'm still a big believer on the Bengals, and I get a lot of crap from people that say, you only tease past the 2.5 to 7.5. And that's 99% of my teasers are that. But I actually kind of I think the Bengals keep it closer. I wouldn't hate going from 5 to 11, passing the 6, 7, 8's a little bit more key lately, and the 10. So do you have any thoughts on teasers or philosophy on that?
Most obvious teaser of the week and maybe ever is that Chiefs-Eagles teaser. Hard not to play that is the philosophy this week. It'll be the only people that probably are not going to be on it are the people who say that, well, everyone's going to be on this, so I don't like it. I don't know how you don't like that teaser one way or the other.
That's called the uber contrarian that does that.
It's where you're talking yourself out of what you wanted, but what you don't. Yeah.
I call that talking yourself out of making money.
There you go. Well, can't go that far, but look, you get both teams off the bye at home with really good matchup advantages, past history of success against these teams relatively recently. and you're looking at those numbers, and you can make a pretty strong case that they should both be higher. And if you're teasing down for spots where you can find like it's a pretty good 2-team teaser, no question.
I think San Fran wins the game. I just don't know if it's going to be over 3 points. I think the coaching will come in, and everything you said. When they play a bad schedule, it's almost like Georgia, right? It's like Georgia's beating teams past their expectation. So the rate, when you beat a team past their efficiency expectation, the rating goes up on that team anyway. So is that kind of the correct philosophy to look at San Francisco?
It's one thing to say that, like, okay, here's the strength of schedule. They're beating bad teams. Jacksonville beating bad teams with bad quarterbacks. There's no question about it. What really becomes important is saying, like, okay, is that a spot where we have seen the team sort of get priced higher going forward? Like, is this a team that we've seen get bumped up in rankings that are published across the internet? Is this a team that's increasing in popularity? And if so, is that justified? And I think that it's a bit of a different way of thinking, because it's easy to look at the Niners schedule, say they're not beating anybody. It's a 7th round quarterback. Like, this is the week where it all falls apart. But then you're doing that week after week after week after week, where the 49ers just continue to exceed expectation. They continue to cover. They continue to look better and better on offense. There's a little bit more going on than just being able to sort of identify that one spot where it falls apart. It's just a really good football team with a really good scheme that continues to exceed expectation.
Absolutely. No disagreement there. I like the Niners. I kind of went into it like I think the Eagles and the Niners are just a step above the rest of the NFL. So let's hope we get that great matchup, coming into the conference week of the playoffs. Adam, thank you so much for coming on this show and breaking down all your thoughts on these games. Where could our viewers and our listeners get your great media and great plays?
Really easy. Just on Twitter at Adam Chernoff, and then everything else is handicapper.net for Red Angle Sports.
All right. Make sure you guys check out Adam. He is a great follow and a plethora of sports betting information. Have a great weekend, Adam.
You as well. Enjoy the final 4 games before we get to 2 and 1 game weekends.